Good morning, Grace.
Hi. Hi, everybody.
Welcome to our listeners and today's episode of Can You See What I See? Vicky Scott here. And today, my co-host Grace Hart and I want to talk about social conditioning and whether it actually runs our lives more than we think.
Absolutely.
But first, Grace, how did you go after our last episode on addiction to judgment? Because I noticed that whatever we talk about seems to come up in some way for me over the next week.
Yeah, I do find that every time we sort of do home play, it's like, we're part of this too. We're not experts. We're sort of learning and growing, and you're just part of that, I guess, that we're sharing it with you in the hope that maybe it invites you to some change as well. Well, for me, the big one was just the addiction to trauma thoughts, and I've been on my own trauma healing journey, and, I reached a stage a couple of weeks ago, and it really highlighted when we spoke about it that you can actually go from the addiction to that trauma voice, the inner critic and the dissociative parts, etc. You can actually get from that to a new biology where that's not even happening anymore. So it's no longer about using the information of trauma and trauma-informed, work to be okay with where you're at and move through with where you're at. You'll actually get to a stage where you don't need to do that anymore. That, the petals have changed and a whole new biology. You're literally a different person. Your body's different. And because your body's different, the mind is different, and so I'm celebrating that. That's my journey. I've kind of gotten to that point, and I never even thought it was possible. So, keep doing the trauma work, guys. You may just create a whole new personality that's trauma free.
That's interesting. So you've actually found yourself moving from where you knew you had the tools to deal with it to it's different now. You're not experiencing it in the same way.
Yeah, every time I worked on the trauma stuff, it, less and less, and you get greater and greater, and you feel better and better. And I just thought that's what would happen. You would just become happier. And it never occurred to me that there's going to come a point where that trauma's not there anymore. I thought it would always be there, and you just learn a new way of being with the trauma-informed stuff. And it is a journey. They call it the long rescue. Sometimes people heal overnight, and that's great, but generally speaking, it takes a little bit of vulnerability on your part to look at, especially if you've come from, like a narcissistic parents, or you've been in a relationship with someone who is, you're going to have echoes of that, because we tend to absorb the abuse from our partners because we're trying to figure it out. We're trying to work out, like, why do they do this? And we end up, taking it on board ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. There's a lot of gold in what you just said there. It'll be interesting to see what you do with that, my dear.
I know. It's a whole new world. I'm so excited. I was talking, I have a chat with my counsellor once a month, and this time I went, hi, and she said, oh my gosh, you sound completely different. I said, I feel completely different. So yes, celebrating that's a possibility now, which is so good.
That's wonderful. Well, Grace, today we want to talk about social conditioning. And you know me, and I've been talking about how Can You See What I See is really about just increasing our vocabulary around things that it's not really there. But social conditioning, it's been around since time began, I'm sure of that. But it's only since that, I guess in the academic world it was sort of named first up back in the 40s or so, and then built on over that time, I guess. But when you think about it, that process and behaviours of social conditioning, the ancient cultures, they used it to pass on stories and to pass on their culture over generations. Nothing was written down as their history, but how did they survive for 40,000 plus years here in Australia, for instance? There must have been something working about that, hey?
Yeah, this is the thing. We in my universe, it's conditioning's been there all along. Whether it's through parents thinking they're doing the right thing by not wanting their kid to stand out or get bullied, or how to hold a job or how to keep a relationship, and you don't want to be, seen different from the rest. And what I see, the world that I'd like to see, is where we actually celebrate our differences, and we don't try to be, normal. That we actually do give ourselves permission to, be the weird and wacky. Isn't that what creates change in the world? When someone thinks differently to others, a new possibility can show up. Whereas I think we've bred a whole society where we're so afraid and so indoctrinated by, parents and society and social media and television and advertising, and I'd like to see that change.
You're so right. When I think back to what our needs as a human being are, it's really about we need to belong, and we want to have a sense of community
belonging.
And to have that connection. And, because we've been such a traumatised society over centuries, just about surviving, our parents didn't want us to get hurt, and so, they were conditioned to be a certain way, and so we learned that, to think, well, okay, I can't put my head above the parapet, I've got to fit in. In order to fit in, I've got to do A, B or C. But, when I looked at some sort of a definition of what a social condition is, it was defined, this was a bit scary for me, I have to say, because it was defined as characteristics of both social and physical environments at the individual, household and community levels that are potentially modifiable. So basically it's like, that's what, and it went on to talk about in homes and schools, workplaces and neighbourhoods, so that could be shaped by policies. So we're talking about stuff that's very powerful.
Yep, total infiltration. You're getting it from all directions, aren't you?
Yeah, we're being moulded.
Oh, it makes your skin kind of creep, but, there's a lot of truth in what you're saying. For me, that's definitely the case. And what else is possible, hey? I wonder.
Well, yeah, and I just wanted to say a little bit more about the fellow who, Albert Bandura, nearly 50 years ago, he asserted that most human behaviour is learned through observing, modelling and imitating the behaviours, attitudes and emotional reactions of others. So, I can understand that, because even just thinking back to my own childhood, you look, you observe, you learn, you basically do what you feel you need to do to fit in and to do what feels true for you at that time, I guess. But often it comes from a place of, how do I feel safe, secure and supported, like you often talk about.
Yeah, and your parents can only do the best that they can do, and so when when you're young, they're your world, and so you do look up for, if you fall over and you look to your mum and dad, and if they start freaking out or crying, then something really bad's happened. If they kind of go, oh, little Johnny, come on up yet, then you kind of go, oh, okay, this is normal. It's okay to fall and get back up again, So it's amazing how much we copy and mimic and then that forms who we are. And so what I would love to invite, the listeners is, how about we just pretend that we've just been born and then choose what you would like to have as your beliefs and your values, rather than going on, oh, that's just who I am. What if just who you are isn't what you think? What if there's something even greater that you can step into if you stepped out of the conditioning? I wonder what's possible.
Well, there's a difference, I think. Conditioning can have a negative impact as well as a positive one. For instance, let's start with the positive, I guess. There's lots of advantages to social learning in that it's a natural way to learn, isn't it? That we all do it every day. If you talk to somebody or you're showing them what you're doing, then they're going to learn. You don't necessarily have to write it, even with recipes and things. You don't necessarily have to have a written down recipe. If you watch somebody make something, you'll often learn it quicker and better than if you go and read the recipe, so to speak. And, there's a lot of, it's not so high in costs. There's so much more. There are many benefits, I think, of the social learning. And for me, that's probably one of the ways of my preferred way of learning, because once I can see something, it becomes more real to me.
You know what you've just stepped on that I'm just it's a whole world's just opened up for me.
Right.
So you're correct. You know, there's a great deal that you can learn from people by how they do it or how they respond, etc. And so what just came to me when you were talking is awareness is your true protection. So if someone's, you know, being a certain way, rather than just being controllable by that, like, oh, that's my only choice, or that's what I have to do, or that's what's expected of me, actually just look at it and say, is this something I'm choosing? You know, if I had total choice in my life, is this how I would like to do the recipe? You know, does it work for me? Rather than, you know, not even realizing that you're being indoctrinated or controlled. Because as you say, I've learned so much from you, just how you be with people. And I would want to choose that. I would want that to influence my life. And I know you've influenced my children's lives, you know. So, yeah, so I can really see that it's really about being aware of what people are choosing and then choosing for you from that awareness rather than that's the only choice. I have to do it that way.
Thinking you've just got to follow the leader, basically, yeah. But, you know, talking about the negative side of social conditioning, it was some time ago, I remember I used to read a lot of books about the Second World War and different things, and I was wondering, how did such a thing like Hitler and what happened there happen? How did it happen? And I remember reading about Joseph Goebbels, who was appointed as Hitler's Minister for Public Enlightenment and Propaganda. Now, wow, Minister for Public Enlightenment and Propaganda.
Oh, wow.
Even just saying that, it makes me feel, I think everything about it feels so wrong.
Yeah, it makes my skin crawl.
Yeah. But, you know, the sad part is we actually do still have many, many people employed in the media and marketing areas of government portfolios. We just don't say they're responsible for public enlightenment and propaganda.
Yes.
But that's, you know, it's about giving the messages that the government wants to give, and not just the government, the opposition, any politician who wants to be in power has to find a way that they think they can obtain that power. But I just want to talk some more a little bit about what happened with Goebbels, because it really brought up for me, nothing's changed in our world. That, you know,
yeah. Just looping round and round and round.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. Well, Goebbels' job was to promote German pride, but at the same time the anti-Semitism. And if we consider what was going on for the German people in the 20s and 30s, you know, we're nearly 100 years ago now, but they were right to be influenced by anyone that made them feel better. That's what we look for as a human being, isn't it? That's something to make us feel better. And at that time for them, you know, they were in the middle of a pretty difficult time because the inflation from World War I, etc., had wrecked the German economy, and the morale of all the citizens was low because they'd been defeated in the war. But that's what caused me to think about, oh my gosh, we, at this point in time in our history right now, it was a reminder that we're on a slippery slope here in this world, because when we feel we're all suffering, we look to blame someone for that. So, you know, we go into that place of making others wrong and accusing them of being selfish and self-centered.
And that's the polarity, isn't it? It's the let's go around the hamster wheel of who's right and who's wrong and get distracted by that, rather than looking at, okay, what can we create?
But see, what we don't often think about going to creation mode.
No.
We look to demonise people.
Exactly.
And then that dehumanises them.
And creates separation, right?
Exactly. And then that makes it easier for governments to segregate and divide and conquer, basically.
Yeah, it's a genius way where governments actually create things to get the population to, you know, be in that little hamster wheel of being against, you know, one group of people against another group of people, so they can be all distracted whilst they get controlled by the government or whoever it is, you know.
Exactly. So, and that's exactly what Goebbels had complete jurisdiction over the content of all the German newspapers, magazines, books, music, film.
Can you see a theme?
Well, yeah, I have to say that, his mission was to censor all opposition to Hitler and present, the Nazi Party in the most positive light, but at the same time, stirring up hatred for Jewish people. Now, we all know where that took the world back then. And so my question is, each of us taking our own responsibility to look at what we are currently doing and looking at how we've been socially conditioned to see if we are doing something similar to other human beings.
Yeah,
now,
I love what you're saying. There's a self-reflection required personally, not from wrongness of yourself, just having a look. Where am I doing this, and then also being aware of when it's happening to you.
Yeah, because here's the scary thing, and Goebbels even said this himself at the time. He said that if you tell a lie long enough and loud enough, it will become the truth. And that, for me, is on my hat. So
I love it when you say that. It always makes me giggle.
Does it?
Yeah.
Are we actually willing to look at the world as it currently is and ask ourselves, is this what we want for ourselves and for our children and grandchildren?
Yeah. And sorry, go, honey.
Well, it's just a big red flag for me.
Yeah.
So I think to me, it's a reminder that we should always be open to learning that something we've never questioned may just fit into that category. So
that's gold. Yeah, absolutely. And of course, because my background is, with domestic violence and trauma transforming, this is one of the techniques that abusers use. They keep telling you things over and over again, whether you're not going to be believed, you're stupid, you're hopeless, I'm the best you can get, or whatever, whatever they say. And they say it long enough that you hear it and hear it and hear it and hear it. And then sometimes it even gets to the point where you end up saying that to yourself all the time, or sharing that to somebody else, that as though it's fact. And there's no question in your universe. You just suck in their, perception of what they want you to believe and condition you to that. So therefore they've got you controlled. You're not going to go, speak to an authority because you've already indoctrinated yourself that you're not going to be believed. And the other thing that happens is they can use triangulation, which is, bringing in a third party, so-and-so says this, or, the police, that they'll be this way. And what you just spoke about is exactly the same. This is what happens in a greater capacity with governments and policies where, they bring in a third party or a third expert and then all of a sudden, your world of choice goes out the window. And what I'd like to invite is to say to you, well, does it really go out the window? What if you can still have total choice? And what would that look like for you? And what would you like to create even though you're aware of indoctrination or conditioning outside?
Yeah, because I do believe that, we can be conditioned or groomed to think a certain behaviour is normal.
Yeah, exactly.
And, for instance, even laughter, we all love to laugh, but, sometimes I think it's actually used as a weapon.
Absolutely. Laughter and minimisation can be really potent tools of control and power. When someone says, uses a funny word with you, and if you came back and said, oh, that makes me feel really uncomfortable, they're going to say, oh, come on, I'm just joking. That's the minimising. And it's not, I'm not hitting you or anything. It's just a cute little fun name that I use with you or whatever it is. And I know for myself with when I was in a domestic violence situation, there were numerous times where he would say certain things and I'd find myself repeating them factually because it was a joke. It was almost like I was just using that joke to make people laugh at my expense. And it never occurred to me that he was conditioning me. And you might also have a partner, for example, that might say something like, oh, God, my ex was like this and this, and oh, thank God you're not like that, ha, 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 ha. Right? And then so your only normal reaction to that would be a laughter as well, like, oh, yeah, it's good that I'm not like that, and oh, my gosh, that's terrible. But what that's actually doing is using humour and triangulation, bringing in that third party, the ex-partner, to say to you, this is not appropriate behavior, so you can't do this to me. And you'll find you've been controlled because you don't want to upset him. He's given you, or she's given you, the information. If you behave like this, you go into the category of what I hated with my ex. And it's all done really as a nice little spiritual joke, you know? It's clever.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really interesting one, isn't it? Because often people will then, you know, if somebody chooses not to laugh, they're made out to be the wet blanket, or, oh, come on, get a life.
Don't be so serious, you know. That's not abuse. I'll show you what abuse is, or, you know, it's so easy to push back like that, and then you find yourself being quiet, you know, and that's what I really encourage men, you know, when you, and I am highlighting men, but I'm very aware, you know, abuse does happen. It's not gender related. However, you know, guys, when you're out and about, if you see someone, actually anyone being appropriate, male or female, say something. You know, actually call it. As long as there's no risk to your safety, of course, call it. Just go, that's not funny. What made you say that? Or what made you think, what did you get would be created with you saying that? Like, challenge them.
Yeah, you that's not an easy thing to do though, Grace.
Well, you've got to have your back. Yeah. And this is it. You know, I personally speaking, I couldn't. I can now. But back then, no way. I would rather just walk away and, you know, just leave that conversation, or just be quiet. If I had to stay there, just be quiet.
Yeah.
You know, because you don't, that's been conditioned. You don't speak up. You don't draw attention to yourself. You don't put yourself in the way of someone else. But of course, now I know the majority of perpetrators, when you start asking questions and start speaking up, it's a beautiful way to energetically give you self-defense, because they know, okay, don't mess with, you know, Grace. She's going to be hard work. Whereas if you sit there all complacent and quiet, you know, in a sense, they've got control over you for that conversation too.
Yeah, well, I do think that's been, I just know in my own mum's case, she often would just stay quiet, you know, and I still to this day, bless her, I still don't know what she might have been thinking at the time. But I think part of that was that we didn't have language around it. And, you know, it's very different now when you can see it for what it is.
Absolutely.
And as we build this vocabulary, this new library.
It's empowering, isn't it? When you have these terms, gaslighting, that's what it was. No wonder it felt wonky, or, you know, triangulation, or bulldozing, or, you know, stonewalling. Like we're getting these terms now that we can go, this is abuse. That's why it felt wonky. Yeah. And look, we do the best we can with what we've got. And even people listening now, please, I'm not trying to make you wrong. I was where you are or were, or, you know, and it is a journey. However, I would just love us to start to, not from a place of wrongness, just look at this, you know, do I have traits? What can I change? And again, not from a wrongness, from a strongness.
Yeah, absolutely. But, you know, there's also another part to that too, is just not using our full potential. Now, what I mean by that is, because of the conditioning we as parents may have had, we may have passed on a belief about just stay safe, do this, you know, do what's expected. You know, the number of times I've heard of people that have degrees and double degrees in academia, but they can't function as human beings because for so long that was their reason for being. But once they achieved it, they realised it wasn't what they wanted. It was what they thought was expected of them, etc. So what that has brought up for me, apart from the fact that a lot of those people, and I do know of many, that have been impacted to the point where antidepressants have been required and they actually start to withdraw from life itself. But we have tended to shut down the natural, that, you know, people's unique intuition and creativity over time, where they stopped trusting their awareness and stopped
and separated from it. Didn't even have access to it anymore. That's what happened with me with, you know, ongoing trauma.
Was it?
You forget who you don't have you anymore. It gets less and less and less. You separate. You start to be groomed and conditioned by society, perpetrators, whatever, and you lose sight of, well, what is it that I actually desire? That's a good question, guys. Maybe that can be home play. Ask yourself, what is it that you truly desire?
Oh, how nice, because I think that language of possibilities is somewhere being diluted over time. Or maybe it wasn't there and it's just now that it is becoming possible that we start to think about, what is it that I really do? And is it okay for me to really want that? And is it selfish or is it whatever?
And that's the indoctrination, because, this, for me, there is an innate being. There's this being that's you, and it knows what it's here for. It knows who it is and what it desires. And so naturally, when you choose to be you, you will bring in all the things that will contribute to you, being that contribution to the planet. But we tend to separate from that and be that safe, external petal of what our parents or society or et cetera wants us to be.
Yeah, because then there's also on from that is well, if we don't do that, does that mean I've failed? And I love that. I think it was Thomas Edison who said that somebody talked about he hadn't failed. He'd been trying for years to make the electric light bulb.
Yes, I remember that.
He said, I haven't failed. I now know 10,000 ways of how not to create an electric light bulb. And what if that was more the common experience rather
and that's
than
him being that's him being himself, and the post-its, the post-it notes, that's a failed glue. That's and look how great that product is, because they quote unquote failed, right? So
no such thing as failure unless you give up, right?
Yeah, I think about, I've used this example a lot over the years. It's not new, but I love it. Like a kid learning to walk. Can you imagine the first time they stood up and fell? We just went, all right, all over, get a wheelchair. It's insane. So it's, whereas we don't give that gift to ourselves. And sometimes we forget to give that gift, oh my gosh, to our children or our friends, allow them, encourage them.
But we've been conditioned, particularly by media and marketing, just like in Goebbels' Germany, really, about, how to be a better version of ourselves. Everything, makes out that we're not quite enough. So you're conditioned from an early age, you're not pretty enough, you're not smart enough, you're not whatever enough. And I remember back in the 60s seeing ads for washing powders that were aimed at women feeling better about themselves because their washing was going to be whiter if they used a particular brand of washing powder. And I remember...
keep up with the Joneses, right?
Well, and that was the pressure on people to keep up because if somebody else had it.
You want your clothes to be as... Exactly.
Yeah. And if you had a Hoover washing machine, then you were going to be happier. Now I look back at that and I'm thinking, really? We equate happiness with
hoovering? That's a nice conditioning way to get you to spend time vacuuming, because you want to be happier, so you better get hoovering, right?
But how often is that? We can't settle until our house is clean anyway. Anyway, so
I know.
You don't realise how
until you actually ask the question, does hoovering make me happier? Like, what other choices are there? Yeah.
Yeah. And it is a slow drip feed, isn't it?
It's like coercion. Yeah.
Coercion. Say some more about that.
Sorry, say again?
Say some more. What do you mean about its coercion in relation to that?
Coercion, anything that's drip fed and it's like drip, 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 be this, be this, be this, be this. You don't realise over time the rock that the water's dripping on is changing. So it changes who you are. You just end up believing it and sprouting it, and without being in question.
That's interesting. It's true, isn't it, though? I just remember, my mum, she was a very bright woman and became a nurse during World War II. But it was in that time when doctors were given the prestige of being a doctor meant that they knew more. So nurses over time were sort of encouraged to hand their power over and ask the doctor, doctor.
Yeah.
But there was so much innate wisdom that, my mother's parents had lived on the land and didn't have doctors available, so he lived to 103, so he obviously knew something. It was her dad, and it really just, it's just one of those things. When you lose your confidence, then you start to look out that somebody else knows better than you, which of course in my mum's case caused her to shut down and seek help, but really only got antidepressants as a result. So nothing to do with actually saying, hey, what else is going on for you?
Well, what you just spoke about is for me gold. When you put your awareness below someone else's.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's what you always talk about, that we all have our own unique awareness. So if we don't check in with that, then it's like with a whole raft of possibilities that you're just not even paying any attention to.
Yeah, for example, I'm not a doctor, so if something happened to me medically, I would want to go and listen to someone who has more skills, capacities in diagnosis than me, obviously. So I go speak to that doctor, but I'm using my awareness that as he's saying this is the case and this is all your choices and whatever, I'm listening and I'm using my awareness as I filter through what he's saying to make choices that are greater for me. And some of it might be taking on what they're saying is actually true, but it might also be, oh, when he said that kind of went wonky, so I might just explore something, someone else around that. So this is where always trust your own awareness, in choosing who to listen to and what to listen to and what works for you and what doesn't. Don't just suck it in as truth.
Yeah. It's so, I guess all this talk about conditioning too, it flows on from our talk about judgment and our addiction to judging. Do you think that we often judge because we've been conditioned to judge? Or?
I think it's all indoctrination. Yeah, it's, we've been taught that to change something we need to judge it, and it's just not true. You might need to acknowledge something like this is what's created and I don't like it, so we need to change it. But you don't need judgment. You don't need right and wrong to change something. You just need to choose. If something's not working for you, choose. You don't need to judge it.
How come you make it sound so simple?
Well, what you're talking about is conditioning. We don't even sometimes know what it is or that we are. One of the things that I'm really like, oh my gosh, I just want to get on a soapbox and scream out to the world is grooming, as far as, that's another form of conditioning where we don't, as parents, I certainly didn't, I was aware that, you see it in the movies and stuff that there's bad people out there. But what I didn't know is that the high 90% of all perpetrators of, sexual abuse, etc., are people in the family, people that are known to the family. And it wasn't anything in my universe. I never looked at my friends, not from a judgmental point of view, but just from an awareness point of view. And, actually one of the things I did want to talk about, I listened to a speech by Grace Tame. She's the Australian of the Year, and she was sexually abused as a child. And, oh, man, I'm so proud of that woman with what she's creating and inviting for us all to pay attention to. And she talked about the 6 stages of grooming. And in a sense, this is conditioning, right? And so one of them, the first stage is targeting. They target their audience or who they want to abuse. And, there's certain types. So get to know that, whether it's they've got, a lot of positivity, they might be vulnerable in size, vulnerable because of a disability, too innocent, trusting, don't have that much access to their parents. And then there's the second one is gaining trust. They'll establish a friendship. They'll offer special outings or discuss their personal life or share secrets, or, if they're older, they might provide alcohol, for example. And then the third one is filling a need. If the parents aren't there for them, they'll step in as the parent or the fun person or whatever that child is missing. And then the fourth one is isolating. So they'll actually start to remove their supporters, or say things to make them not really want to chat with mum and dad anymore, or teachers, our little special world. And then stage 5 is specialising. And that's really making sex normal, sort of saying, oh, this is just part of bathing, it's normal, or this is part of play, it's just normal. This is like a normal bedtime routine, and these sort of hugs and cuddles are, it's special, it's normal. And then number 6 is maintaining that control. And, they can use physical intimidation. They can blame the victim, that they wanted it or they encouraged it or they enjoyed it. They can use fear, which is, no one will believe you and your parents will be incredibly disappointed and ashamed in you. They can threaten the victim, which is like, your mum and dad will go to jail or be harmed. And then they can use sympathy, where it's like, oh, only you understand me, and, there's a specialness there. And then they also employ confusion, which is a bit like gaslighting. That didn't happen, like you said. That was just an accident, or it's normal behaviour. So you're making a big thing out of nothing. And I just really think that, given that the high 90s it's people that I would like you to just be in awareness of who your kids are dating, or your young children. If they're going to spend private time, whether it's with a tutor or whatever, start asking questions. And not from fear, not from, judgment, but just take the rose-coloured glasses off, because the stats are saying pay attention to this. And, one of the things...
There's certainly enough of it out there, isn't there, to know that it's not just an isolated
You think
case.
It's never going to happen to you, and then you wake up one day, and one of the things that I didn't realise that I learnt about was, if you've got a partner or someone that seems to have extra information, like extra personal information about a child, say you've got a group of kids coming around to your home, but they have more information about one kid over the other, that's actually, believe it or not, a red flag. And a lot of parents might think, oh, well, just that kid's talkative. That's why they know that extra information, because you just don't think like them. You don't think that that's going on. So it's not somewhere your brain even goes to. And so, unfortunately, what I'd love to say is, be aware of this. And, if you do have a partner, or someone who's saying a lot of personal stuff about a child, make note of that. And what I'm really excited about, it's a crime now. If you see or know of abuse and you don't go to the authorities, you can be jailed. It's a crime now. And I am thrilled. Yeah. So it's not just counsellors.
It takes a village to raise a child. And,
exactly.
But somewhere along the line we've been disenfranchised, where it's not okay to speak up. And I think
there's fear as well, because we get groomed.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
We're groomed.
Yeah.
You don't. Yeah. If you speak up against someone who's domestic violence, for example, you're worried they'll come and put the attack on you, and that's one of the ways that they control you. It is important to trust your awareness, because if you go and put your hand up and it's going to cause you they're going to come around and attack you, or if it's not safe for you to say it at that time, obviously get help and speak to somebody. Don't just jump in there and create even more problems for yourself. But there's safe ways that you can stand up to these people, or at least get the police to go over and have a talk to the family, and you not be involved. Yeah.
Grace, it's so funny. I think this is our episode number 12.
Yes.
And as we get more comfortable about it, different topics come up that they feel a lot heavier in some ways. But maybe it's just that we're starting to see all these dots are connected now, that as a community we are disconnected, which has opened up all these other possibilities for all these other things to happen. So
that's right.
So you've already given us some home play. So is there anything else you reckon that we could
I can't think of much else. What about you?
Yeah, I was just thinking about, just notice, are we still impacted by old social conditioning that's no longer working for us?
Question it.
Just be in question. So until next week,
yeah. Well, what you're saying is so true. I mean, we're talking about a lot of sort of heavier topics, but what I'm loving is that I would like us to be able to speak about things that are vulnerable, to speak about things that are uncomfortable in a way that's not judgmental, in a way that's just an invitation for you to say, hey, have you paid attention to this, or have you noticed this? And then you can start to empower yourself, and because that's what has happened for me as I've become more and more trauma informed, and I've learned all these things. I feel like a person that's actually able to contribute greater and have people's backs more than I ever have. So it's a beautiful place when you are willing to have these conversations.
You're not alone. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
That's great. Well, thanks, Grace. I look forward to talking with you next week.
Yeah, absolutely. Same here. And thanks for listening, guys. And if you'd like to get in touch with us, please go to choosinggreater.com. And also any topics, if you'd like to give us any feedback or any topics you'd like us to speak about, do let us know. All right, till next week. Catch you later, guys. Bye.